Mr. Stivers from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here and sharing your expertise. It seems to me that we all know that the flood insurance program has to do a better job of pricing risk, number one. The flood insurance program also has to, we have to decide how much risk we want to give the taxpayers, number two, and whether we want to have the taxpayers have a lot of risk. The third issue, I think, is how we deal with broader participation. We need to all recognize that there are people that live in areas that probably should be participating in the flood insurance program that aren't participating. And then the fourth issue to me personally is I think we need to figure out how we can encourage growth of a private market over time, not necessarily immediately, and I don't think it will happen immediately. I'd like to kind of hit those one by one, and I know that some of your written testimony talks about pricing risk. I have a real concern about the government's ability to price risk. It just has shown, not just in the flood insurance program, but in many programs, in many ways, that the government doesn't do a very good job of pricing risk. Do you have any specific recommendations that any of you that would help the government do a better job of pricing risk?
Mr. Stivers, Frank Nutter, we represent the reinsurance market, and the point that I've made about the two suggestions we have made is that if you introduce the private reinsurance market into the program, you've introduced into it the risk assessment mechanism that the private reinsurance market does, which it does routinely for catastrophe risk, for earthquakes and tsunamis and floods and windstorm. And I've made two proposals. One is that the program actually go into the market and seek to lay off risk into the reinsurance market on the basis of a data analysis between the NFIP and appropriate brokers. And secondly, there is a pooling mechanism in the existing legislation that's been dormant for 40 years, 35 years. And while I'm not suggesting it be reinstituted, I am suggesting that it does provide an opportunity for the private sector on a reinsurance basis to participate through a pool with a program. And again, it would have that interaction, the private sector risk pricing, risk assessment mechanism.
Thank you. And briefly, that was a pretty good answer. Anybody else have any other ideas, suggestions? Yes.
Yes, Congressman. I'd just like to add that part of it, you're right, and government is never going to be that good at pricing risk just simply because it's not good politics necessarily, charging people what it actually costs.
Terrible politics,
so
right. Yeah.
Part of the way to guard against that is to make sure that we don't expand the program, so we don't add in wind insurance, or we don't actually add in, has been suggested and is in the draft, coverage for business interruption or other areas that could be insured separately, just because we know that government is inherently flawed in that. And so the more that we expand the program or even increase annually the levels that are available in insurance, we're crowding out the private market, and we're putting the government potentially more on the hook at not pricing risk adequately. So some of it is don't make it worse.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about encouraging participation, and I can't read your name, I apologize. I know you talked about the lack of participation. Are there proposals that would, you could pass a law that says everybody has to get it. We passed a law in the 30s that said nobody could drink, or in the 20s, and people drank. But so passing a law won't necessarily mean compliance. What I'm curious of is how do we get more compliance of people that should be buying flood insurance to buy flood insurance, as opposed to just saying it's mandatory, which obviously is maybe a start or part of it, but I don't think that alone is a solution.
I think the bill does a very fine job in going down the road of ensuring compliance with it. There are mandatory purchase requirements regarding properties that are backed by federally backed mortgages, and there needs to be a continued enforcement on it. Within the National Flood Insurance Program, they need to be able to track better those properties that have flood insurance, and in the event they allow those policies to lapse, to be able to institute any type of remedial action or penalties to ensure that it's done.
Thank you. Let me ask you, let's say my house is paid off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a mortgage. How do we enforce that?
I don't think you can enforce that, but I would suggest that a prudent person would want to protect their largest financial asset. And that may not be a position for the National Flood Insurance Program, but one of understanding the risks that we all have. And I know my colleagues as independent agents will counsel our clients that the exposures that they have and to properly protect those exposures. There's
Let me let somebody else weigh in because I only have a limited number of time. Thank you.
I just wanted to mention that, anything that a consumer wants to purchase, they're going to purchase if it's an attractive product to purchase. And right now, the program has a lot of unattractiveness to it. I hear it every day. When I explain the program to a client, like, nah, I don't think it's something I need. I think this bill does a lot towards making the policy and the coverage is much more effective.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm sorry I'm out of time.
Okay.